Welcome to the official Ronnie Landis podcast show, where you learn to upgrade the human experience through natural nutrition, lifestyle design, and consciousness engineering. This is no ordinary health or personal growth podcast, and Ronnie Landis is definitely no ordinary host. Get ready to receive your upgrade in all you believed was possible, starting now.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the official Ronnie Landis podcast show. And as always, I am your host, Ronnie Landis. I am also the founder of the Holistic Health Mastery Program. This is my online holistic nutrition certification course, which is designed to take a student from the basics of natural nutrition all the way to the most cutting-edge areas of integrative health and lifestyle transformation. This program is really unlike anything else that's ever been available on the internet, featuring a comprehensive 70 video lesson curriculum, 55 bonus videos, a student community support group, and a monthly live video training with me personally, which is like doing a coaching session with me and hundreds of students from all over the world each and every month. This program has received incredible reviews and feedback from students of all backgrounds and all educational levels, such as the budding health experts and professionals to longtime holistic wellness enthusiasts, all the way to the complete beginner. There seems to be a lot here to offer to virtually everyone who has a keen interest in learning how to optimize their body, mind, and spirit through redesigning what they believe is possible, not only for their health, but ultimately for their life and the lives of those around them. And one more thing that sets this course apart from all others is that once you enroll, there are no hidden fees, no limitations on the content that you can access up front, and no time restrictions. This means that once you purchase the program, it is yours. Period. End of story. There's no 6 or 12 month time limitations with a continuation fee waiting for you at the end. This is a go at your own pace course that you can continue to access as a lifelong resource that will prove to be an investment into your education, into your health, and into your personal growth that will bear fruit for years to come. So you can find more information and enroll into the Holistic Health Mastery Program at www.holistichealthmastery.com. On with today's show. And what a show that we have for all of you out there. I mean, this is just such a monumental show. You could tell in my tone right now, I'm having to be very present and mindful and almost take a step back, because this was a moment in time that I had been looking forward to for many years, since I first was introduced to an amazing book called Spiritual Nutrition by Dr. Gabriel Cousens, who is today's guest. My life was changed. My perspective was changed. My whole understanding and peripheral filter, if you will, was completely shifted, and my destiny was revealed in front of me. And that's no exaggeration. I remember sitting in a park reading this book, reading about the subtle energy fields of the body, reading about how raw living foods affects my energy, it affects my consciousness, it affects my ability to heal. And at that time, I was in a place in my life about 7 or 8 years ago where I was making a transition from one stage in my life to another and trying to figure out what I was going to do with this whole health and nutrition experience that was emerging through me. And this book helped anchor that in. It helped me understand that my destiny was going to be as an orator, as a voice for a message, and a message that needed another voice. And that's what happened to me, and that's what I do now in the world. And so this message was, or this conversation I feel was years in the making. And what a monumental conversation this was. We had to do a special 90-minute episode with Dr. Cousens because I had so many questions for him, and there were so many areas I wanted to drill in with him because I have studied his work extensively, in-depthly. I've read a number of his books, and I knew that I could kind of steer the navigational wheel in a direction that probably few people really could, just because I understand his body of work better than most, in my opinion, only because I do this work professionally, and I've drawn from his body of work so extensively that I felt we could really take this conversation in a unique direction, and that's what we did. Oh, wow. I mean, I'm tempted to just almost give the overview of the entire conversation, but at the same time, I really, really want to just invite all of you to just take a deep breath. Become very mindful as you open up to this conversation. It's one of those that really has the power to invoke something very deep within you. And we really talk about the variabilities on a high raw food diet, detoxification, why some people get very ungrounded on a living foods diet, and how Dr. Cousens helps to anchor people back on the ground, the great saying, head in the clouds, feet on the ground, through dialing in your nutrition strategy. And that's been a huge help in me in my own diet, but also helping to instruct other people on a high raw food diet so that we don't experience these imbalances while we live in a three-dimensional world. So our feet can be anchored on the ground and we can experience an unlimited reservoir of life force energy, which is the whole point of his work in spiritual nutrition in the first place. And so anyways, there's so much that can be said about this interview. I'm going to conclude my thoughts at this time, and I am going to invite you, once again, take a deep breath, and here, without further ado, Dr. Gabriel Cousens. Enjoy. Cousens is the founder and director of Tree of Life Foundation, Tree of Life Center US, and Cousens School of Holistic Wellness. He has published research articles and lectures on a variety of medical and psychological topics around the world. He has taught extensively in 20 countries on 6 continents. People have come to programs offered by the Tree of Life Foundation in Arizona from 125 countries. In his book, There is a Cure for Diabetes, Dr. Cousens presents his Rejuvenation Center's program for reversing diabetes naturally. The center currently reports a 45% reversal rate in type 2 diabetes and a 21% reversal rate in type 1 diabetes in only 21 days. And there is so much more that we could say about this man, but I think it's better to just bring him on. It's with great honor that I bring on Dr. Gabriel Cousens.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to be here with you, Ronnie, and I want to honor you for the good work you are doing to bring the higher awareness to really the live food movement. I like to start with a prayer, which is to me particularly key to live foods. It's about elevating the earth to the heavens. And here it goes. L'Shem Yakud Kudashabihu Ushahinte. Ilaya Shibuke Babavke. Yidar Slam Shem Kuzrael Ko Alam Amin. And what it means, as I explained it, but in terms of live food, and particularly a spiritual viewpoint of live food, is how do we take the physical body and turn it into a superconductor of the divine, which is really the essence of my work and was expressed most clearly in Spiritual Nutrition, the 2 different volumes that I have, which is essentially, again, how to become a superconductor of the divine, how to move through the light body, which is a doorway to the higher bodies, and the life food helps open our access to the light body. So that's kind of it. That's where I got started. Initially, in 1973, my wife and I had a dream while she was pregnant that the fetus was a chicken. And we both became vegans that day. That was really simple. Because that was like, oh gosh, that's what we're doing. We're killing, and by eating chicken, we're killing a sentient being. In 1975, after I received Shaktipat from my one of my two spiritual teachers, gurus in India, Swami Muktananda, I evolved and went into the nothing. It's like every chakra lit up, and then I just disappeared. But on the way down, as I started coming back into this world, a little voice rang out and said, you should learn to eat and live in a way that supports the Kundalini. Kundalini is the spiritual energy within all of us that when it's awakened begins to take us to liberation. So that's how I got started with live foods, because I began to explore the question, well, what's the best diet for spiritual evolution? And it became very clear as I looked at the big picture that it was a live food, vegan diet, no spilling of blood, and I saw that the ancient rishis, several thousand years ago, that's what they did, except a touch of dairy, which in that case was live, for their B12. The Taoist masters, the ancient Essenes, the initial Gandhian diet. I'm kind of like, in a sense, the vegan from Eden, but those were essentially liberation teachings from a nutritional point of view. So that's how I really got started in this big picture. But I wasn't the first. It's been there all along, all the way, at least for the last 6,000 years. So that's my little story here of my experience into it. There's one other part is that, okay, my interest only initially was live foods or spirituality. But then I began to see, particularly when I got back from America, I lived in India for 7 years, I began to see that, wow, people doing the live food, a certain group were pretty imbalanced. What's going on? And so now I had to look at it from a different point of view. I had to look at it as a holistic physician. And just hold on a second. As a holistic physician. And in that context, I had to look at people's health. And so I saw, wow, what's the problem here? And what I saw is people were really focusing on this low-fat diet, okay? And they were focusing on a low-fat diet, which wasn't doing well for them because many of them needed more fat in their diet. There was this whole fat phobia, cholesterol phobia, and as I point out in my diabetes book, there really isn't any evidence whatsoever that if your blood cholesterol is between 160 and 260, you're going to get any heart disease or anything like that. So it's like, and this is the AMA journal that really said this finally. So the point, and that was in 2009. So I'm saying, well, what's the problem? Here I'm back in the early 80s. People are really imbalanced. If you just do leafy greens, you're going to create what we know in Ayurvedic as a vata imbalance. Okay? There's 9 different Ayurvedic types. And those Ayurvedic types are can handle things differently. So if you're a Vata, you're more likely to get disturbed emotionally, mentally, and spiritually if you don't have some grounding foods, such as soaked nuts and seeds, pâtés, that kind of thing, that are more grounding to the experience. And they balance the tendency to get Vata imbalanced. That's the key. So, whereas a person who's Kapha, which is more watery and earthy, they can do much better. But the initial emphasis was on what we would call a cleansing diet. But people just stayed on the cleansing diet and didn't really get the idea that you have to have a maintenance diet.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a shift, and I began helping a lot of people say, well, don't worry. Eat as much nuts and seeds as you want. As I've gotten in more detail, as I played out more with the diabetes, where we're in 3 weeks healing 61% of type 2 non-insulin dependent and 24% of the type 2 insulin dependent in 3 weeks. Better as the weeks go on, but just a 3-week thing, which is really, there's no results like that around the world. Okay, that's 100% live foods. So, but what I saw is, and this is my point, people really needed a amount of fat of not this 10% low-fat diet, which really didn't really help them anyway. 25 to 45% raw plant fat. That's the key. Mm-hmm. And and because to heal diabetes, you have to have lower carbohydrate, and the protein has to be really between 10 and 20% in the diet. The reason for that is the optimum anti-cancer profile, okay, is between 35 and 70 grams of protein a day. It turns on the longevity and anti-cancer genetic program. So you need to stay within that. You can't really go too high in protein. And 70 grams isn't very high. So it was fat where we could make some adjustment, because you want a moderately low carbohydrate, which is really leafy greens, sprouts, and actually, believe it or not, in nuts and seeds there's some carbohydrate. But leafy greens and sprouts are your main plays. I didn't mention fruit for diabetes. Generally, fruit somewhere around 15 to 25 grams of fructose glucose is fine. It doesn't seem to cause a problem. So I began having to look at it from this holistic medical point of view, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I want to jump in on this. I really love what you're sharing, and you're kind of leading into some of the topics that I wanted to touch on, and maybe this is a good opportunity for me to provide even more context for everyone listening. And I definitely want to touch on these specific subjects with you, but I kind of want to take it back for a moment if we can. My first question that I want to ask you and provide that umbrella of context here, for the benefit of everyone listening. For everyone that is both familiar and unfamiliar with your extensive work and research, is there a way that you could best sum up what your professional focus has been over the last 40 years as a health educator? You're kind of painting that picture for us now, but I just wanted to ask that question.
Sure. So let's kind of go back. First, I was really into biochemistry. Mm-hmm. And in college, at Amherst College, I was like two pieces which show up in my whole discussion. Captain of an undefeated football team, and inducted in the National Football Hall of Fame as a college, okay? And all New England middle linebacker and guard. Now, that's one aspect. The other aspect is I also published papers in biochemistry and bioactive. Why in college? Okay? So I was really into biochemistry and molecular biology. So that's what I took with me. And I went to medical school, and the same thing. I didn't I was kind of like passed out of the chemistry thing. I was getting hundreds on all the tests. So I got out of my biochemistry and began doing research, and so that was an aspect, okay, coming into it with a serious scientific aspect, scientific thinking. What I saw in medical school is that they had all these metaphors that they just made up, but they didn't really understand what was going on. It's a huge problem because it has a religious belief system.
Right.
Like, vaccines are safe and effective. Well, yeah, let's look at the research. Now, I'm not going to get into vaccines, but you get the point I'm making.
Yes.
Research doesn't support that. Oh, fat's bad for you. No, I don't think so. And eventually, since it started in 1953, eventually people got, raw fat isn't bad, So I had that kind of, let's look at the research. I don't care about your opinion. What's the research say? But actually, and this is part of my work, I was living in central Harlem when I was in New York City at Columbia Medical School, and I developed a variety of programs and things that, this is back in the 60s, that were really community control of Harlem Hospital. I lived 1 block from Harlem Hospital, and I really began to see the connection between health and social action. Okay? That becomes much more an issue today with psychopharmacological abuse, overabuse, drugging kids who are 2 years old, and so forth and so on. We can talk about that a little bit later. So there's a lot of pieces with that, or the vaccine type of issue, which again is debilitating the environment, the society, the world society. So I began to get involved after I finished my residency in psychiatry and more family therapy, which is kind of network type work. Then I began to evolve into holistic medicine, and I began to be very clear about a lot of people had severe hypoglycemia. And if you're 90% of alcoholics had hypoglycemia, and they were often drinking to treat their hypoglycemia, just as an example. So I moved into a field called orthomolecular psychiatry and orthomolecular medicine. Okay? That's a key term. And began to kind of approach it that way. And from that, I began healing diabetes naturally, hypoglycemia naturally, and so forth. And eventually in 2007, when we did the diabetes movie, I kind of set a platform that, wow, we can do this. And so that's when I began kind of put it into what I call the social action. So I have actually programs in 13 different countries, in Africa, Mexico, Bali, a variety of places, Papua New Guinea. And because by going back to the natural ways, and I call it veganic, organic, I don't focus on the live food internationally. It's just enough to go veganic, no spilling of blood. That's enough of a shit. I'm working to heal the precursors of diabetes, which is a high complex carbohydrate junk food diet. One of the key researchers in it at the very beginning wrote a book called 1975 called The Saccharin Disease. Basically, he said 20 years after white flour, white sugar, and junk food come into society, there's an outbreak of diabetes. So now we have the social action and the science action coming together, which has kind of been the key of the trend of my work. Now, that's one level, which is the social action part, and helping the whole world move to vegan and eventually live food vegan. The other aspect is how to make every single person that comes to me successful on live foods. And I will tell you that applying certain systems, which I have, one is the Ayurvedic, at least about 99% of people succeed. That's a very high percentage.
At least 99%. That's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah, and how I do it is I individualize the diet, because genetically, on chromosome 19, we have a program for how much carbohydrate, protein, and fat we're supposed to eat. Mm-hmm. It's not a debatable, it's not like, oh, this is my philosophy, it's the same kind of stuff, right? No, this is what the research shows. And about 25% of the people need a higher complex carbohydrate diet and lower protein, lower fat, and about 75% need a higher fat and higher protein diet and lower complex carbohydrate. So if you don't get that right, what do? What do we see so often? Some of these are so pro-low food because they're in the detox part and they're feeling great. Mm-hmm. But then they're not eating according to their constitution. As they 75% need a higher protein, meaning 70 grams, okay, which is not very high, but 70 grams versus 35 grams. And they start saying, well, I have to have some meat. And it's like that's a totally ignorant way to go about it. Mm-hmm. Okay. What you need is to have more nuts and seeds. And if you're a Vata person, you need to hydrate those. So it's seed pâtés, seed sauces, and so forth. And we're fortunate today. We have things like Klamath Lake algae, spirulina, and chlorella. And basically, I check people to see how much protein they need. A lot of people can be protein deficient, particularly if they're what we call fast oxidizers or parasympathetic. Those are two systems. And they need 1 or 2 tablespoons of these concentrates per meal, and they're great. Everything works fine. Like egg is 44% assimilated. Meat, fish, and chicken are 16, 17, and 18% assimilated. That's not very good. And these are 90 to 95% assimilated. So you don't really need a lot. So you just add these protein concentrates and everything kind of balances for people that need a higher protein, that need the 70 grams. So that's, using those systems, the Ayurvedic and the fast slow oxidizer system, and what we call autonomic nervous system, which is a term that unfortunately is what they use, but not very accurate. We're really able to have people be successful on a 100% live food diet. So my research has then been social action, the diabetes, and individual success. Mm-hmm. For people like, well, how do I do this? I wasn't feeling great. Now I'm not feeling so great. Unfortunately, in the vegan world, there's this tendency to have more of a religious viewpoint. Yes. Which is it's got to be a high complex carbohydrate, low fat, low protein. Again, it does work for 25% of the population. But the other 75% doesn't necessarily do so well. And I think it's a really, really important thing. The other contrast with the vegan, which is the energy of live food and all the levels of that, is Dr. Bernard, who's a leading vegan, and we're fairly aligned, but they have their food cooked. When he did a study for 5.5 months with diabetes, having people do organic vegan, basically they got 40% reduction in medication. They didn't cure diabetes, they didn't really reverse it, but they decreased medication. That was hailed as a big breakthrough. But, we're talking a totally different thing. We're talking 61% healed, and our people were more sick also, of the non-insulin dependent, and 24 of the insulin, 100% healed, which is a blood sugar less than 100, a fasting blood sugar less than 100. Wow. And what we also found, as it averaged out, is that 97% of the people came off all medications. So your insulin-dependent diabetic, and they sometimes have oral anti-diabetic things, comes off all medications. 97% versus a 40% drop. So we get dramatically better results with live food. Mm. So those are kind of the areas. So I'm going to say 3: the social action diabetes, individual curing of diabetes, and how to make organic, veganic, live fooders 100% successful. And I'm talking running at 99% live food. Now, I define what we found is that if you just did 80%, some cook like beans and so forth, but you did 80%, after a few years, you get many of the health benefits and some of the spiritual benefits of doing your 99% live food. I don't say 100 because I don't like people to be obsessive. So that's what I find. Now, since a long time, I've been this 100% 99 to 100% live food person. And the other thing I found as an athlete is I'm getting stronger. It's like, how am I getting stronger? What's going on here? That's not supposed to happen. So when I was a captain of an undefeated football team, I in college, I could do 70 push-ups, which was more than anyone else. So at the age of 60, I did 601 push-ups on the 6th day of a fast. Okay, we want to up the ante, right? And now at 73, I'm doing 50 pull-ups. And the best I could do at 20 was maybe 7. Wow. So, it's interesting, right? It's like, wow. And I do that twice within an hour. But the key, there's another key here. The diet varies.
Yeah.
So I saw that when I was, people who are 60 and over need slightly more protein. Whereas if you're like 45 or something like that, excess protein doubles your rate of mortality and quadruples your rate of cancer. Adding a little protein after 60, 65 actually increases your health. So I had 1 tablespoon of clamothylic algae. That's all I did. At that point, within a few days, I went from 25 to 30 pull-ups because I wasn't breaking I wasn't getting higher than 25. And so just one little shift having to do with chronological age, suddenly that little adjustment. So we have to keep adjusting according to who we are and what we're doing. Now, those are just some thoughts. And so there's that level of research, too, is that we have to more scientifically experiment on ourselves, making the micro adjustments.
So in essence, our life has to become our laboratory.
Exactly.
This is thank you so much for sharing that. A number of insights emerged through me, but I'll omit some of them for the time being. But one thing I want to acknowledge for you is that it would be very easy based on the Vegan Association, because there is so much dogmatic and religious point of views when it comes to everything. I think it's more of a neurosis that's part of the human culture more than it is just one culture. But when it does come to veganism, one of the things that I've had a trouble navigating is the abrasiveness that comes with a lot of people's viewpoints and their intolerance to other people if someone else has an opinion or a point of view that's contrary. And so it would be very easy for someone to put you in that box because you do promote raw veganism. And if they only saw the surface of the message, it would be very easy to say, oh, well, Dr. Gabriel Cousens is probably dogmatic too and whatever. But when I listen to you, it's very obvious to me that you're not in the spirit of dogmatism. You're in the spirit of scientific validation and looking at, you obviously have a philosophy which drives your moral compass, but you're looking at the actual results and you're like, okay, what are the results saying about maybe this philosophy, and how can we bring that to people that it's not dogmatic, but it's based in a scientific reality?
That's exactly my approach. It's like nutrition can't be a religious thing. Yes, it's religious. Yes, you should be vegan. You don't want to spill blood. And, when you take the energy of death, one of my other 2 gurus, Swami Prakashananda, said it eloquently. He said, when you kill an animal, you create pain, fear, and misery. And when you eat that animal, you take that pain, fear, and misery into yourself, and it manifests in you as disease and death, okay? So clearly there's lines in the sand, and obviously not spilling the blood of an animal is a line in the sand. Okay, that's very broad. Okay, then you have to look at, well, a lot of people believe you should have grains. Well, if you look at the Taoist teachings, the Taoist women of the immortal woman of the 11th century, they say bigu, no grains. And they also say if you mix it with fire, two things, you don't dance on the jewel pond. The jewel pond is meaning liberation. So the Taoists, women in the 11th century said that, but actually, the spiritual Taoists in 475 BC were also saying bigu, no grains. Okay, because it blocks the transcendence. And they use different words because what do you do in 475 BC? Oh, they said the three demons you get with grain. So what are we talking about? You're talking about sugar diseases, right? We're talking about candida and diabetes and things like that. So people were on. None of this is really new. So what we're looking at is even a misunderstanding of what the essential veganism is really about. And it comes down, no, you've got to have a low protein, high complex carbohydrate diet. And again, that has been a great disservice to many people. And then when you get into the grains, it pushes buttons more. And then when you get into the fact that soy is pretty dangerous, it blocks your thyroid. Actually, soy milk has 22,000 times more estrogen. Okay, than kind of what a kid should be having in soy milk. And it goes on that they did a 5-year study of people having soy products twice a week, and it showed they had significantly more brain degeneration after 5 years. Now, these are not winning things. Plus, soy at this point is a great deal of it is genetically engineered, maybe 86 to 90%. So I come out against soy too, and it's like, well, because it doesn't hold anymore. It was cool in the 60s. We used to make our own soy in the 60s, but now the research comes in and says, well, no soy, because it's cooked and it's got all these very serious problems, and it's also very bad for your thyroid and your brain, and it's just okay. So we have to go with what the research says. That's pretty strong, and not be attached to kind of religious conceptual beliefs, how it should be forever.
Let me ask you this question on that topic. I did a lecture in Nicaragua a couple months ago, and one of the people asked me a really interesting question about a lot of the vegan diets out there, and I thought it was so pertinent because I have been meditating on this question for quite some time, and now I want to pose it to you.
Where were you speaking in Nicaragua?
I led a 7-day detoxification retreat, and this was in December.
Where?
Little Corn Island.
We had some little community there right against Ometepe, the island in the middle of Lake Nicaragua.
Oh, wow. Nicaragua
it's opposite San Juan. It's like 15 minutes in San Juan.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
Hey, go ahead. I get off the point. Go ahead.
No worries. So here's the question. As I've been observing the vegan community, I observe all the diet communities because it's a function of my work. Even if I disagree with people, I still want to know what their thought process is. Where are they coming to their conclusions? And so with this whole high carbohydrate, low fat, the term low fat appears to me to be the focus. And my answer to this particular individual was that my suspicion why people emphasize low fat is because they are associating fat with animal foods ahead of time. And so their dogma, so to speak, about animal foods is leading them to the perspective that fats are somehow bad as a whole. Like all fats in general are going to clog your arteries, and it's just bad news. Do you have a similar perspective or insight on that?
Well, I think you're definitely in the right direction. People clearly get confused with that. All fat is animal fat, but avocados are not exactly an animal fat product, okay? Let's take avocado. People who do avocado will lose, if they don't eat more than one or two a day, will lose 17% of their weight. They'll actually lose weight on avocados, because the truth is, fat doesn't make you fat. Carbohydrates make you fat.
Right.
That's another topic. Well, I don't want to divert for a second. But they also have less heart disease, okay? So we have these myths, and one of the myths is somehow animal fat, which I don't think is very good, because animal in general, but about 96% of the toxins that we get from the environment, in our food, is an animal, okay? When you eat lower in the food chain, vegan, you get only 4% of the toxins. So clearly, and mostly the toxins are stored in the fat.
So the animals are sponges for toxins.
Right, and we don't want to do that. Okay, that being said, raw plant fat is not only safe, it's actually quite healthy. And the ancient people, before we had pesticides, herbicides, and all that stuff that we have in our environment, they tended to have a higher fat diet. So that's really one level of the answer. The other level is fat does not clog your arteries. We've got to be clear about that. That's why the research, in fact, they showed research with 52,000 people in Norway, that women who had a cholesterol of 270, okay, wow, that's really high, right? They lived 28% longer. Okay, so there's lots of evidence-based research. It clearly shows that it's actually better for you. And in fact, people who go low cholesterol, less than 160, have about 6 times more depression and suicide. Okay, that's pretty serious. Okay, they have more stroke, more tendency for Parkinson's, and cognitive decline. When they did a study with people in their 80s, with about 700 people, they found that for every 39 points higher cholesterol you actually had 15% less mortality. If you're 80 and above, you're going to have a higher mortality. So they were able to get a microscope view of that. Now, that's an important statement. We also know that people who have a higher complex carbohydrate diet after the age of 70, because it gets worse with age, have significantly more cognitive decline. That's pretty important, as compared to people with higher fat in their diet. So there are lots of pieces here where people get it mixed up. One is associating fat with clogging arteries. 2, associating with fat with animals. Therefore, but the truth is, we can get plenty of fat as vegans, no problem. Nuts and seeds have very high fat content. Avocados, there are different things that we have that, coconut. So we have lots of fat that we need, as much as we need. So there's really no problem with it. Now, I'm raising it from another angle. We're not going to get fat deficient, and the truth is, our livers make 80% of our cholesterol. Oh, wow. Well, then don't worry about getting enough cholesterol. It's all taken care of. But also don't worry about eating too much cholesterol, which is mostly in animals, because it doesn't matter anyway. People with higher cholesterol live longer. Okay, so you see all the nonsense that's going on, and then people go on these low-fat diets, and it actually throws off their brain function, literally, and increases rates of suicide, and so this is not good. Okay, and cognitive decline. We don't want that happening. So you want to have the adequate fat, which what I see and the way I look at is 25 to 35%, 25 to 45% raw plant fat will give you the adequate fat intake. Now, sometimes I have people with a naturally low cholesterol because there is a genetic variation. I will put them on coconut oil, which raises cholesterol, till we get it up to around 160, which is a safe zone for people.
One of the things you mentioned was cholesterol, and it's another kind of interesting topic because from a lot of what I guess I'll just for simplicity I'll say the vegan perspective in terms of, again, a lot of people will well, maybe this is the best way of saying it, because we have all these diet wars, right? We have all these like banner flag raising kind of bipartisan positions of diet. And so everyone's trying to make their case and sway people to their side. So what we'll just call it the paleo side might say is that, oh, well, you need more cholesterol because you need to form your hormones and your neurochemistry and your brain functions on cholesterol, yada, yada, yada. And then from the vegan side,
which I actually agree. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
But you don't need to eat meat to do that. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. And so, thank you. This brings me to one of the points I wanted to get your take on. When it comes to cholesterol, from my research, I found that yes, I did find that most of the cholesterol under like ideal physiological and stress reduction circumstances, our body will form most of our cholesterol, but there seems to be this thing when if somebody is hyper stressed, if they have a stressful life, maybe they're not doing what they love or whatever the case is, their body will somehow utilize all that or a lot of that cholesterol as fuel, and they'll need to get that cholesterol or that fat from an outside source.
Yes, and that's why I mentioned you have your nuts and seeds, of course, but don't forget the omega-3s. We've just been talking about cholesterol. But you have your nuts and seeds. But again, coconut oil will raise your cholesterol. I use it to help people who have burned up their cholesterol from stress or whatever reason to get it up around 160. I like to see it around there for people.
Okay.
But we have easy ways to do it. Yes, your liver makes 80%. And cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. Inflammation is the foundation of heart disease, is the driving force behind diabetes plus the sugar intake. Okay, that's really what goes on. And then when the arteries get inflamed, there's certain cholesterol, what we call the tight cholesterol versus fluffy LDLs, who try to go in and kind of treat the inflammation. That's how that cholesterol in the arteries comes about. But it's not a cause. It's the body's attempt to try to heal.
So it's like a buffer.
Yeah. It's an attempt to heal the inflammation.
Okay. So what's coming to my mind right now, you mentioned inflammation. I often will point out that if our pancreas is not able to produce the beta cells for insulin, or there's an insulin sensitivity, that sugar that's not being carted by insulin properly causes abrasions in the arteries. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't use the word. You're right on in understanding it, okay? The main cause of the heart disease is excess sugar. Okay? What happens is the excess sugar then goes into the body, into the fat cells as triglycerides. And the higher triglycerides, the higher rate of heart disease you have. Okay? That's one. Two, sugar in itself is inflammatory. So there's two pieces to that. But it's the sugar converting to triglycerides that then seems to be much more a heart attacking situation.
Okay.
So your theory, yes, the sugar is the driving force. But it first goes to triglycerides, then it goes into gumming up your arteries.
Okay. And then obviously calcification fits into this picture as well.
Yes. And there's kind of several points to that, is that 85% of the public is deficient in vitamin D. So vitamin D, among other things, is cardioprotective. It works with 10% of our genetics. It's huge. So it affects your mental state. Low vitamin D creates diabetes, contributes to diabetes. It's connected to heart disease. Okay, that being said, you need adequate vitamin D. But if you don't have adequate vitamin K, the calcium that comes in naturally through your diet, because we don't really use much calcium supplement because it hasn't been shown to really make a difference. But that calcium, you're naturally taking in with your leafy greens and so forth, it may get deposited in the tissues or in the arteries, okay, because you don't have enough vitamin K to stimulate calcitonin to make it actually go into the bones.
Is that vitamin K2 that you're speaking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that vitamin K2 can be taken as an MK7 supplement or comes from natto?
Yes, natto miso, yeah.
Okay, is that how you typically recommend it?
I like it from, hold on a second. Just wait 1 second. I have a little bit of an emergency call.
Mm-hmm.
So, hello? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. I will tell you, okay, it sounds good, and I know we're in on that. I'm actually doing an interview, so I got to get off the phone, but I'll call you in about an hour, okay? If I need to, okay? Thanks, Jack. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, we're back on. Sorry for the interruption. It was an unusual call I had to answer. Okay.
No worries. I can edit that.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So, yes, that would help. So, where are we now?
So, I just asked how you recommended the K2.
I do the K7, and go from there. The conversion rate of vitamin K to K2 isn't so great. So, I think you need to take a supplement for that.
Okay, and you know what? You just led me into an interesting area. When I first got into raw food, I, like many people, was teetering between this philosophy of, eating from the Garden of Eden kind of idea until I actually came to Hawaii and realized nature works differently than my shopping market consciousness did, where I realized that it actually isn't that simple, and that in the world we live in, although idealistically I would like to get everything from food, I found that certain supplements were crucial for me and still are. And so I kind of want to just point that out for anybody else listening, and maybe you can elaborate on that idea.
Well, what I see happening is that, and this is a thing that between meat eaters and vegans, everyone's deficient.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in this world is deficient in B12. I mean, I'll take B12 as a good example. So if you're the minimum amount of B12 is 200 nanograms, but you want 400 and 450. So at 200 nanograms, the average vegan live fooder is 80% are deficient and 40% of meat eaters. But now let's go from 200 to 400 or 450, right? At 450, probably 80% of meat eaters and 90% of vegans, live fooders, are deficient, or vegans in general. So what I would say is those aren't really great odds. So I have no trouble, since you need B12 for energy, you need it to help literally convert in your digestive system to make carbohydrates for energy for your body, and it's absolutely essential for your nervous system function and your brain function. Okay, you need it. So we live in a world where we can get it. So that's how I kind of look at the picture. So then I say, well, meat eater, the truth is almost everybody I see needs B12. So meat eaters and vegans and live fooders all need B12 supplement to be safe. Okay, and I think that there's a lot of subtle mechanisms in there, but that's the bottom line. If you want to check out, are you in that 10 or 20% that don't need it right away? Because there's a loop, a assimilation loop. So B12 is made in the large intestine, at least for the last 200 years. Okay, and then from there, some of it gets absorbed into the blood, right? And depending on who you are, that will be the difference of whether you need B12 or not. But as I say, over time, almost everybody gets deficient. Okay, so better to take a supplement. Now, there was a case that I mentioned in one of my books where there was a guy in his 90s, he never took B12, he was a vegan for 40 years. Suddenly, he couldn't walk, he couldn't think, nothing was working right. They had no idea what was going on. Somebody had a bright idea, let's check his B12, which it was 0. They
Wow.
gave him a few shots of B12, and he came back to life. His mind started working. So you can take that route, but it isn't worth it for me. It's like, fine, I'll take a B12 supplement. And there are natural B12. What does B12 come from? It comes from bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And there are vegan bacteria, I'm going to put it that way, that are kind of, as a culture, there's no animal anything or dairy anything. And you basically take the live vegan bacteria, and that is what you use, and you're supplemented, and you're not going to necessarily go into a deficiency. Now, for children, it's much more serious. So kids aren't born with a lot of B12, but when the little bit of research that's been done with kids actually who do not get adequate B12, they actually don't repair so quickly as the guy in the 90s. Some research, it kind of suggests they don't repair, or they get some repair. In other words, damage is done, irreversible damage. So I think that it's absolutely essential for vegan parents to give their kids some sort of whole, natural, live B12 supplement. Now, that's just one example of and again, meat eaters and vegans have slightly different variations, but 85% of the public is vitamin D deficient. And, basically 95% of the public is meat eaters, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So these arguments really, vegans really need to talk back to the meat eaters and say, you're equally deficient. Maybe slight variations, but you're also going to have B12 deficiency. And I think that's the way a scientific way the argument really goes.
Mm-hmm.
And most everybody's vitamin D deficient, 85%. And 80% are magnesium deficient, even though we're having leafy greens with lots of magnesium. And in vitamin A, the conversion rate really isn't so great, in the beta carotene. So about 47% are deficient also in vitamin A because they don't convert into the retinol. So it's like that everybody's deficient. So it's not like if you're vegan live food, you need supplements and other people don't. And we live in a world that stress is so high that we're just use our B vitamins up or our B12 up and so forth.
I really appreciate that perspective, and I think that's the crux of the matter, is that we are living with more psychological, emotional, and to some extent physical stress that it's chronic stress, right? It's not like, even from the paleo perspective, it's not that, like maybe like once a year we went and hunted an animal and then that was our stress. Like, you're literally living, or not you, but I mean people are literally living with chronic stress every single day, and that is like a catabolic storm that it's literally breaking people's body down from the mindset down. And so I have a question.
I'll just say, like, you got chemtrails,
right.
You have radiation stress, you have pesticide and herbicide stress. So we didn't have that before. Even if you're eating organic, you're still getting a certain amount of pesticides, herbicides in your system. Yes, if you're vegan, you're eating lower in the food chain, you're going to get less. If you take vegan kids, they'll have 1/4 to 1/6 amount of vegan organic kids. They'll have 1/4 to 1/6 the amount of pesticides and herbicides, but they'll still have some. So this isn't going away. So it's just a chronic, toxic synergy that people are facing, and supplements are a way of countering it.
I just had a thought, fat, like saturated fat, the right kind of fat, is kind of like an insulation from a lot of the toxic stress that we face.
Yes. Right.
Okay, wonderful. I want to shift into, with the time we have, there are two questions that I really just want to make sure that I present for you. Now, you've kind of laid into this one, but maybe after I ask the question, it'll provide some more distinctions. So here it is. How can somebody truly thrive on a high raw vegan or even vegetarian lifestyle long term? Because as we've talked about, and we have seen over the decades, that some people who are highly passionate about this lifestyle either forget to do what they preach, or they simply fail to get the results long term that they may have received in their youth.
So what I would say, because I use myself as the laboratory, right? Mm-hmm. In my book, Conscious Eating doesn't promote one way of doing it. It promotes approaching it consciously. So the key is we have different constitutional types. And, some people need higher protein, some people need lower protein, some people, need to balance kapha or vata or pitta or combinations of those. There's 9 combinations. So the reason I'm successful, okay, not just for myself, but for people I work with, that 99% success rate. Actually, there's only been one person in 40 years who hasn't really done it, and she was a person that lived in the Arctic Circle, okay, and there was some genetic thing. But the point I'm making, and she had that fish once a week, it's like, okay, that's it, okay, but what's my point? You have to apply all the principles of your unique constitution to your diet. That's the key, okay? And I want to just take it from diet point of view. Everybody needs to do a certain amount of exercise and so forth and so on. But dietarily wise, which is really what we're talking about in the moment, that's what has to be done. People actually have to understand that we're unique beings, and we need to approach our diet according to our age, meaning our position in our lifestyle. Because in our life cycle, so for example, when kids are pre-puberty, they need more of a kapha ameliorating diet. They need a little bit more bitter, pungent, and astringent foods. Dairy, ice cream, those are terrible foods for kids. That's why we have so many kids that are over an epidemic of obesity. Mm-hmm. Okay, so but at above 45 to 60 and above 60, then you need a vata pacifying. Everybody needs that. Okay, slightly more sweet, sour, and bitter foods, because that's sweet, sour, and salty foods, because that actually is going to balance the vata. So you have to kind of go with your lifestyle. You have to go with your life cycle, your lifestyle, and your unique constitution. When you bring those together, then you're creating an appropriate move for your total situation. That's why I get 99% successful.
And I imagine from your perspective, there's certain transitional strategies that people can use depending on their phase and stage of life. Like, for example, you mentioned that one woman, whether she had to or not, she did have fish once a week. And I find that an interesting thing for you to say because of your veganic position, but also at the same time, understanding that there are variables. So I think actually my question out of my curiosity is that and
that's one person in 45 years.
That's one person in 45 years. Okay, got it. So my question, I guess, following that up was going to be, do you find a place transitionally that animal foods work?
Well, I stopped in one day because of that dream.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So not everybody, does that.
Right.
So the way I look at it, take your time because everything should be done with joy, not like I'm not happy with this because that's not a good healing situation. So whether it's a month or a year, or a week, I suggest right now, because of the radiation in the oceans, I suggest letting go of fish to start with. It's not what I used to teach, but hey, Fukushima wasn't a thing then, and Chernobyl was a slightly different radiation exposure, okay? Then I go to chicken because it's got so many problems. About 100% of chicken has salmonella, even quote organic free range, okay? So that's not so good.
Yeah.
And, maybe it will take you a while to get where you are there. And then I go to beef, okay? So we're getting rid of the animal parts, but you're doing it kind of over a period of time depending on your personal willpower and commitment to it. Because you don't want to stress yourself because that's not the point. You want to stretch out of the box a little bit, but not go so far out that you're going to rebound. Because we don't. So I want people to avoid rebounding. Over time, people slowly let go. Fasting is extremely good for getting rid of your cellular memory. So that accelerates the whole process significantly. So after meat, fish, chicken, and then we do dairy. And dairy, like meat, has actually, and like grains, like wheat has 11 to 15 opioids. Opium-like substances that make you addicted, okay? And dairy has some of that opioid tendencies, and so does meat. So what's my point? My point is that these things are actually addicting, and sometimes if you just go a little slow, you can slowly wean yourself off them. And then you can, it's like dairy has caseomorphines. Oh, that's addicting. Why? Well, because the mama cow puts it in their milk so the calf doesn't stray too far. It gets addicted.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So, but the point I'm making is, okay, you've done that. Now, we don't, at the Tree of Life, okay, we're a total organic, veganic experience, and we don't do the grains because we have that kind of Taoist mix into the story. Bigu, no grains because it too much carbohydrate and blocks it. So we have some sprouted grain, like we have millet and buckwheat and quinoa sprouted, but we don't really have it otherwise, just as a little condiment. So, that's the next step because, again, it blocks the path to transcendence, bigu. So there are all kinds of things we do, in this kind of wraparound organic, veganic thing. We do veganic farming. Well, what is that? Well, we don't use bone meal, blood meal, or manure. Why? Because the animals are fed GMO. So that goes in the blood, bone, the whole story. So fine, we don't use anything from animals. So we have GMO-free food. And it goes on like that. So there's levels. So what we try to do for people is create a context where they can feel comfortable in making that transition change. So believe it or not, 50% of the people are still eating meat when they get it. Now, it's not the case when they leave, but when they get it. And now that, say, this is comfortable, this is a total lifestyle, this is great. 100, and we only serve 100% live food, okay? Obviously vegan. And so they get an exposure to, wow, this is fun, tastes good, feels good, I feel more energy, then they get encouraged. And that's part of the success of our 21-day diabetes program and our 21-day we just have it called the transition program, where people come and, they look at their mental aspects to it, and we fast for a week and learn conscious food preparation. So we have all these training and empowerment. To me, empowerment is very important. If you really, I want to be live food vegan, but you don't have any skills, it doesn't lend to success. So we have, certain levels of a course, 1 week long courses, and we teach organic farming, 1 week kind of course, and we have fasting, we have a kind of a psycho-spiritual mental approach, to help people get rid of their thought forms, because people have thought forms about all these things. It's not all about food, but it's generally show people how to work on themselves. Then the whole movement to transition becomes one heck of a lot easier. And that's the point we're talking about. How do you make transition? Well, you have to empower. People have to feel good while it's happening. Okay, so when you're in a surround around thing like here, what we created, the Tree of Life, wow, your chances of success are much higher. Okay, and then you have the support system as well. So that's how I look at it, and that's why we were able to be a place of transition for people. I'll tell you one more thing that's very important about this whole thing. A lot of people come. We've had people from over 126 different countries come. So every time we send out a notice, it's out of date. You got 125, but it's 126. But the point is, they have to kind of have fun. Okay? And a lot of people say, well, wow, I've reconnected to my soul. Now, in my world, that's called having fun. and when you connect to your soul, reconnect your soul, which is a big part of the Tree of Life being a very spiritual, organic, veganic, live food center, which is its own unique offering to the world, then you start to love yourself enough to want to heal yourself. Wow. And so then you start to be much more motivated in the story. So you reconnect your soul, and then you start loving yourself, and then you got, oh good, I love myself enough to want to heal myself, then you have much greater motivation for making the transition. So all those are very important factors in the big picture.
That, I would love to punctuate what you just said, because through my years, and I obviously don't have the years in this that you do, but I've come to a very obvious conclusion in my own self about this whole health and healing and nutrition journey, and how it can be often convoluted by the details of the superficial, if you will, but ultimately we're all trying to make our journey back home, so to speak. And I found that the detoxification process for me essentially is stripping away all that I'm not in order to reveal all that I am.
Nice. That's really good.
And I found once I came to that personal place, all the stress and all the identity and, all that mental construct, all the stuff that was weighing me down psychologically and emotionally started to fade away from me. And then I got into touch with what worked for me spiritually. Like, how do I feel in my body when I do this? How do I feel when I entertain negativity opposed to when I entertain positivity? And it became as simplistic as that sounds, Dr. Cousens. I have to tell you, working with other people I have a number of clients with stage 3, even stage 4 cancer, and I spend a very little amount of time in the first conversation talking about the diet, and I go right into, look, like, what's your relationship like? Do you love what you do, or do you feel in conflict with what you do? Like, we go through all those layers of the onion to get to the heart of the matter, because I'm very convinced that the emotions crystallize themselves into the physical tissue and create the manifestation of something we call a dis-ease. Do you?
Yeah, I think it's a good perception. I completely agree.
Okay. So I really just appreciate that perspective and bringing about to the central core essence of love, and that leads me into this next topic that I want to unfold with you. There were 3 books that I attribute my initial transformation in this field to. It was the first one was the Sun Food Diet Success System by David Wolfe. The second one was A New Diet for America by John Robbins, and the other book was Spiritual Nutrition. And so with that, I would love to discuss your classical book, Spiritual Nutrition, which was really the foundation of my personal work, the work I do in the world. And I want to ask you, why do you feel that book is still such a foundation for so many people in our field? And maybe even what separates it from so many of the other health-driven books in the world?
Okay, so my focus reflects the book, which is I see how do we eat to become superconductors of the divine. Okay, now that's the essence. Now, I have 2. My first spiritual nutrition book came out in 1986, and then later that's Spiritual Nutrition, the Rainbow Diet, and it's understanding the foods by the outer covering, which reveals the inner essences. And the second is, Spiritual Nutrition, I'm going to say, elevating the Kundalini. So the point is, okay, is that my angle isn't about my physical health as primary. Mm-hmm. Okay, my angle is about my spiritual evolution, and that's what's coming in. So how do you? That came out of that meditation experience in 1975, which is this voice rings out and says you should learn to eat and live in a way that activates the Kundalini, which is the primordial spiritual energy. Evolutionary spiritual energy that's stored in our bodies. When it's awakened, it takes us to liberation. So, not that you can eat your way to God, but which is not a small point there. But what we do find in some studies I've done is 95% of the people who move to a live food diet have more spiritual interest. Okay. That's it. They just have more spiritual interest. 87% in a study one of my master's students did, because we have a master's school, people get a master's degree in spiritual nutrition. She found in surveying 525 people, there was an 87% increase in creativity, spiritual interest, clarity of mind, that kind of thing. So clearly, it improves all levels of mental functioning and spiritual functioning. And I'm going to just say also emotional balance. Like, after people were on this diet for 2 years, so you had to be 2 years on the diet, the amount of depression dropped 4-fold. That's just an example. Because live foods tends to stimulate your neurotransmitters. Okay, that's just a little subtlety that I'm bringing in. So my point is that when you're doing a live food diet, it does help your body become a superconductor of the divine, and that's the angle that makes my work different. We're coming from a consciousness point of view, and a spiritual point of view. So, and also, there's not one way to do it. So, as I explained, you got to be conscious as you approach the whole live food vegan issue, in a way that don't get caught in everybody's belief systems, but work out the best according to your constitution, your variable constitutions. But in moving this direction, you will have more spiritual interest, and I think that's what people experience, and that's what makes my book unique. It's really a spiritual teaching and secondary and nutritional teaching.
I really appreciate that too, is that what I'm hearing from you and what I remember from the book is that the foundational message was that of conscious awakening or conscious exploration, and then the dietary strategies come after that as a byproduct of consciousness.
Right, and as a motivation from consciousness. I want to eat this way because I'm going to enhance my consciousness, my spiritual sensitivity. Oh, well, then that's your motivation. You know?
Yeah, I remember telling somebody one time, I was talking about vegan and vegetarianism, and I had no judgment about it. All I said to her was like, look, this is my experience. Meditating as a vegetarian and then as a vegan is a lot different than what it was when I was eating meat. Simple as that.
Yeah. So I actually, that was part of the motivation as I did the research. Because I began working as a psychiatrist, people had some difficulties with the Kundalini arising for a variety of reasons, and they began to eat meat as a form of self-medicating.
Yes.
Because meat, fish, chicken, and really dairy acts as a sludge to the Kundalini. There's 72,000 nadis, which is part of the subtle nervous system, and it acts as a sludge to it. So it actually blocks the flow of the spiritual energy. So people begin to do it as a way of self-medicating to tone the energy down a little bit. That I find, and then when I realized that, wow, then it goes the other way. So if you're going to eat that thing, you're not only bringing death into your subtle system, but it actually sludges the flow.
That's a really interesting term you just used, because oftentimes people will take the interpretation that it's helping them ground the subtle energies that they're not able to anchor in for whatever purpose. But you use the word sludge, which is a distinctly different term.
Yeah, it's distinctly different. And it definitely, in the yogic system, we talk about nadis, which is your subtle nervous system.
Yes. And
there's 72,000 nadis, and then there's three main ones, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. And most of the Kundalini moves up the Sushumna, or the central channel. So if your meat, fish, chicken, and dairy bring the energy of death into them and actually blocks the flow.
And that's like
it's not really grounded. There's lots of ways to ground in a healthy way.
So that's kind of like a tamasic perspective, like a dead food or a junk food type of lifestyle, like meat, fish, chicken, all that kind of thing. Dead foods essentially fit into the tamasic consciousness, if you will.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
We have a little bit of time, like maybe like 10 minutes left here. Actually, I would love to just talk about that for just a quick moment, if we could, the tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic kind of perspective, because that's something I personally get a lot of value out in terms of like how to categorize different strategies for conscious purpose, and I think that might be beneficial for everyone. So
these are terms that have to do with, in India we call gunas, and there are three kind of states of consciousness. And we carry all those states with us, more or less, and that's important. But we want to eat in a way that's going to stimulate the best state for spiritual life, which is sattva, which turns you in towards your inner light. And that's basically the live food vegan diet. Okay? The rajasic diet is a little bit warrior diet, and it's going to turn you outward, but in creative and good ways. So you're eating good, healthy food, you're eating organic food, and you may be having some meat along the line with that, okay? But everything's organic and prepared right, and it's fresh. And that's more activating, okay? Which, honestly, according to your consciousness, as I explained, well, doing 50 pull-ups at age 73. It's obviously I have that tamasic strength there. I mean, not tamasic, but rajasic strength. The tamasic diet is a diet that creates sloth. Mm-hmm. It's junk food, white flour, white sugar, food that's been hanging around for 4 days, where it's lost its vitality, and it's a lot of drug usage and so forth. And what we know is at least 20 million people in the United States are on illegal drugs, but it's a sloth type creating energy without getting too complicated. There's 70 million people on psychopharmacological drugs, which again brings your consciousness down. So the sloth diet is really junk food, white flour, white sugar, and it turns you into a sloth, spiritual sloth. It isn't just that you go inside; you kind of stay stuck in this. In the classical term, they'll say kind of a criminal mindset. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the classical Ayurvedic term. Rajasic is a warrior mindset, and the sattvic diet, which is what we've been talking about with the live food, organic, veganic diet, is the one that turns you in towards the light of who you are, and it's the spiritual mindset. So the diets do create a mindset, and when we choose those diets, and when we emphasize those diets, then we're one of those diets, we're going to get those results.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that breakdown. And with the last few minutes we have left, I just want to ask you, you've done so much, Dr. Cousens. You've dedicated so much of your life and energy to this. What do you see for, we don't know how long or short life's going to be, and hopefully, it's just going to keep on going for you. But in the time that you do have left, I like to ask elders these kind of questions as a young man in my early 30s. I like to get perspective on this. Where you're at in your life, what do you see as the future of your work, and what kind of impact do you want to continue to make?
What I would say is that there's only God. So my whole perspective is trying to live in a way that most enhances the enlightenment process for the planet, and live in a way that keeps me in the optimum, personally, sattvic, healthy state, which it feels like I'm getting stronger and many things are improving, which is interesting, which is positive. But it's really to bring that message to the world. In the vegan context, what I would say is, bringing organic, veganic, live food veganism to the world, and that's what all my diabetes programs kind of carry that energy. Okay, because I know that for the healing of the world, okay, we really need to go to a veganic diet, and even the United Nations, World Health Association, and the European Union have, even as late as 2010, began to very gently mention that we need to move towards a vegan way of life, because we're just burning up, animal agriculture is burning up all the resources on the planet. Okay, so it's bringing that kind of consciousness to the world, and then working with people individually to help as many people move and become liberated as possible. And I call it holistic liberation, because traditionally it's just, meditate and do that, but I'm bringing a very unique message, which is a holistic approach to the liberation process. So it's humanitarian work, which is going on all over the world. We're spreading into, as I say, we're in 13 countries, but we're spreading throughout Mexico and Africa and a lot of places, bringing this message there, and people are responding. That's the humanitarian, overall spiritual inspiration work, and also working with people individually who are seriously interested in their own liberation. And so the Tree of Life Center, a Tree of Life Foundation, becomes a brain trust for kind of getting that message out to the world. And I would say that's where it goes. And you just keep doing it, and without expectation, but because it's your dharma, which is what we call your life work or righteous living. Those are different terms, but they mean the same thing, your individual dharma. Big dharma is to know God.
Beautiful. So in other words, we are not treating life like a vending machine. We are doing the work because it's our joy to do so, and we will get blessings and miracles, but that's not why we do this work.
Exactly. We're doing it because it's our individual dharma. It's our task, and that task elevates you spiritually. You're always given your world assignment in a way that elevates you spiritually. So that's a way. So you have the true dharma is to know God, and then your personal dharma is whatever that is that elevates the world. But all the tests and trials you go through are what then elevate you spiritually.
That's a great perspective. Oftentimes we will take those tests and trials as some kind of negative, why is God punishing me kind of story. But the reality is that those are just checkpoints in our evolutionary journey.
Exactly. And in a sense, there's an old kind of Torah teaching, which is whatever God does is for the best. And if we kind of see it that way, it really helps. So it's all good, but it's a question of understanding or extracting the good. Okay. So in 1975, when I got, learned to eat in a way that elevates the Kundalini, I really didn't exactly know what Kundalini was, and I had no idea. But when God whispers in your ear, you have to kind of pay attention, and then that's your assignment. So partly then is how do we tune into our life work and our life assignment. So my goal is just keep going in that direction, although I will say that more focus on the spiritual for people and supporting people who really are serious about their spiritual life, to support that group of people as well. As a subset of bringing the whole organic vegan message to the world, and help transform the world in that way.
Wow. I think that's a beautiful point to conclude this on. And I just want to reiterate, this has been an incredible honor and pleasure for me to do this interview with you, to have this conversation that I've been looking forward to for at least half a decade. So thank you for this opportunity.
Well, I'm pleased. I really appreciate the good work you're doing. I think you are, as you say, in your early 30s, and look how advanced you are in understanding what's going on. So it's really good that people like you are out there, helping transform the planet. And I'm very pleased to support you in that work. It's great. I'm very happy with that, And I get, I'll invite anybody who wants to really, see the total lifestyle and total approach to come visit us at the Tree of Life. You just look up drcousens.com. It's pretty easy, and you get the picture. We have Essene courses that are coming up. I have a intense week lecture series on a lot of these topics, but in a lot more depth than you can do in an interview. And then we have our 21-day transformational program, which we mentioned, and our diabetes program, and our conscious gardening program. So we're all set up to help people make that transformation into the next step in their lives.
Thank you. I was going to ask for that information too. And so it looks like you're still giving regular lectures there when you can.
Yeah, we do 4 21-day programs a year. 4
Okay.
21-day, a year. Then I have a fast in the Middle East, and I'm doing, sometimes I do fast and bowing. So, but here, it's 4 a year, plus these other courses, like we have the Modern Seeing Gathering, which is a 3-day event, and, the full-on holistic lecture series, which is a 1 week every other year. I mean, we have lots of programs. It's really an educational center, but it's also a spiritual center, and because they're one. Mm-hmm. It's holistic liberation, holistic approach to liberation. So that's kind of what we're really offering as a direct experiential.
Wow, thank you so much. All that information, by the way, for everyone listening, is in the show notes. You can go directly to the website. In this day and age, I'm pretty sure everyone knows how to find books and order books. And Dr. Cousens has some of the absolute best books on these subjects. Depression Free, by the way, we didn't get to talk about that, but that was one of the original books that I really got into, and my focus in psychological and psychotropic health and nutrition. That was one of those books that was just pivotal for me. So that's another one I just want to throw out there for everyone listening.
Yeah. So we got 13 different books, but check it out, drcousens.com. That's an easy one. There's a lot going on, and we're here, to support the worldwide movement, but people who are really serious about their spiritual work, I'm working with people kind of individually. They have to come and experience, so all that's there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dr. Cousens, it's been an honor and pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, well, Ron, thank you, and thank you for your good work. It's a joy and honor to work with you and support you, because I know you're doing this, really continuing the spread of this energy, and that's really important.
Yes, sir. And then for everyone else listening, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the official Ronnie Landis podcast show with our esteemed guest, Dr. Gabriel Cousens. All the information for his website is on the show notes. You can easily go to his website. And I don't want to take up any more time talking all about this. Obviously, I'm excited about this. So if you listened to this whole interview, you made it here for a reason. You clearly did too. So I want to say thank you for tuning in. And until next time, I'm wishing everyone much aloha.
Okay, great. Take care.